All extracts are taken from titles within the Stories to be Told series. Copyright Tracy DW 2021. Hi everyone, Tracy DW here. If you're a regular listener, thank you for making it to the end of the month and this episode. And if you're a new listener, welcome and thank you for listening. Our podcast is available on all major listening platforms, including LinkedIn, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Now, this is going to be a fairly short episode, but as you know by now, in the Stories So Far episodes, I like to take the opportunity to share with you some anecdotes about my thought processes and learning behind the stories. So, without further ado, let's get into the story. This extract is taken from Hope for Zimbabwe, Arise the Phoenix, and is complemented by the podcast episode ZANU and ZAPU, Contrasts and Similarities. Now, as I have often said, there is a common narrative which runs through all my podcast episodes, and that is, firstly, that Africans were not passive in their struggle for maintaining their identities and regaining liberation, and secondly, that Africa is not one homogeneous entity, but consists of diverse groups of tribes, customs, values, lineages, and socio-political and economic structures. The tensions and conflicts created as a result of bringing people together who are not compatible is the tragedy and legacy of colonialism. It is therefore natural that the process of decolonisation would perpetuate further tension and conflict between people who have different ideologies regarding freedom and liberation, and ways of how to go about achieving this. Zimbabwe is a prime example of how this phenomenon played out against the backdrop of the rise of nationalism in the 1950s and 60s and early 70s across the African continent. In this extract from Chapter 3, I explore events which became the turning point in the struggle for independence. So this extract is from Hope for Zimbabwe, Arise the Phoenix, and it's from Chapter 3, A Rivalry for a Common Cause. The UN enforced the UK's embargo to protest against such apartheid. Rhodesia's economy thrived at first, but then their prosperity began to subside. In the 1960s and 70s, African consciousness began to build momentum. The Bush War, or Second Chimurenga, became the struggle for liberation. It was just like a pivot on which the tide had begun to turn, as both ZANU and ZAPU forces were ignited and began to burn. The first, led by the Shona tribe, the other by the Ndebele, seeing each other as rivals but fought side by side against their true enemy. Finally admitting defeat, there was nothing Ian Smith could do. He finally agreed to an internal settlement to end white minority rule. This was my first story that I presented to my pupils in my school as a focus for an assembly. When President Robert Mugabe passed away on the 6th of September 2019, I saw this as a unique opportunity to share something with a global perspective about Africa outside of Black History Month. I also wanted to find out how many of my pupils knew who Robert Mugabe was, his significance as a political figure, and how much they knew about Zimbabwe. Now, this was a Key Stage 2 assembly of pupils aged from 7 to 11 years, and out of about 240 pupils, only one pupil put their hand up and explained that they knew due to hearing about it on the news. This certainly raises issues about how we as educationalists and carers can expose our children to news content that can enable them to develop a curiosity and awareness of global perspectives about current events, provoking discussion about past repercussions. I went on to share more of my stories through my assemblies, but sharing that initial assembly about Zimbabwe made me realise that we as educationalists and carers have a moral duty and purpose to present a balance of perspective through historical inquiry. This can help to alleviate and minimise bias and debunk the many myths that still exist not only about Africa and its diaspora, but also about the roles, identities and experiences of other diasporas around the world who are also impacted by decolonisation and its ongoing post-colonial issues. If you liked this podcast, you can stay on my website or this listening platform and check out my other podcasts in relation to this one. ZANU and ZAPU, Contrasts and Similarities, Looking Back in Anger, What's Next for Zimbabwe, the Pink Map Project and the Pink Map Reprisal. And don't forget what I call the heart and soul of the Stories to Be Told movement, all my other stories or poetic narratives: Caribbean Wind, Caribbean Rush, Knights at the Round Table, the Berlin Conference 1884, Gone with the Wind, Macmillan's Speech for Change. These are all available on the website in both Kindle and paperback formats and in ebook format at Apple Books and all other digital platforms. Also, the publication of the latest 4 titles. Now, if you want to find out more, just visit storiestobetold.com and check out the learning platforms for The Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong, Bite from the Big Apple, A Story for New York, Hope for Zimbabwe, Arise the Phoenix, and A Story for South Africa. You can visit storiestobetold.com for the other learning content and where you can sign up for my latest newsletter, the chance to win a promotional giveaway each month for one lucky person on my email list, as well as receiving your free samples of my first 4 titles. And finally, remember that you can also send me an audio message on the SpeakPipe link, which is also in the show notes, so don't be a stranger. Feel free to like, follow and share us on social media when you visit the website. Just click onto whichever social media link you would like to follow us on. And, as always, it's a pleasure and a privilege to share my learning journey with you in this podcast series, and I encourage you to either begin or continue your own. History is a matter of fact or perspective. I'm Tracy DW and this is a Stories to Be Told podcast. Stay safe, stay well, stay blessed. Thanks so much for listening again, and I'll see you on the next page.